I processed into the Army in Fort Benning, Georgia in December of 1967. You'll excuse me if I whistle a little bit, I don't have any teeth. I did not graduate high school with the rest of my class. I had moved to Alabama from California, where I'd spent my junior year, and they did not teach Alabama history, so in Alabama, if you don't have Alabama history, you don't graduate. So after I graduated from high school in August, and having a long talk with my father, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia to join the Army. I had to. I had to join the Army. It was my job. I was going to be a soldier. My father was a soldier in World War II. He was wounded in combat. Both of my uncles served in World War II and Korea. This is what you did. Your country needed you. You served. You had a responsibility to do so. Basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia was tiring. It was trying. And I learned things about myself I had never known before. One of the funniest things about Fort Benning, Georgia was I was a redneck from Alabama. I did not have an accent. The people from Philadelphia, the people from Louisiana, the people from California, they had accents, not me. But we got along together. The thing I enjoyed most about basic training was the rifle range and the discipline. Being raised the son of a father who was a sharecropper, I knew what discipline was. I knew what my responsibilities were. The rifle range, I grew up with one in my hand. Of the men in our unit, I was one of the 10 who fired expert. I learned at Fort Benning, Georgia, that I could run 2 miles. I could drop and do 50 push-ups. I could get up and run another 2 miles and never break a sweat. I was a soldier. I was someone who represented my country, and I was extremely proud. Upon completing basic training, I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where I took explosive ordnance demolition training and heavy equipment operations training. In April of that year, I left San Francisco on a Flying Tigers airline headed to Vietnam. On the final approach to Ben One Air Base, I was looking out the window and I noticed all these beautiful lakes that were round and full of water. They were just, and the sun glistening off of them, it was absolutely beautiful. But as we got down above the runway, I realized that those were not lakes, those were craters from mortar fire and all around the base. Once we landed at Benoit Air Base, myself and about 10 other people were called to one side to be volunteers to help load a C-130 aircraft that was headed to the United States. So this truck pulls up, pulling about 10 trailers, and on this trailer is a bunch of bags. And the first thing that went through our minds were, hey, these guys are going home and we're loading their gear for them. Till we got to the back of the airplane. These bags weighed somewhere between 140 and 180 pounds apiece. They were black and they had a soldier's name on them. As we took them up the airplane, a sergeant in dress greens saluted and called their name out. And only then did I realize that this was somebody we were putting on this airplane. We loaded 136 bodies on that airplane that day. And the one thing that went through my mind, having been in Vietnam for a total of 5 hours, is this is the way I will go home. I took my first helicopter ride to Ben Long, Vietnam, where I was stationed. I was in the 20th Engineer Battalion, attached to 7th 1st Air Cav, and my job was explosive ordnance. When we had something come up, either on a trail or on the highway, it was my job to take the bombs apart. And I did that very well. I was proud of my job. I was proud of what I was doing. Our sergeant in Vietnam, our company sergeant, was a fellow named Nicholas Zahn. Nicholas Zahn was 6'3" tall. He weighed 245 pounds. He was the biggest black man I had ever seen in my life. And I grew up with sharecroppers, so I knew what, he was a father to us. He knew what he was, he knew who we were, and he knew what we were supposed to do, and we did it. The biggest gift that Sergeant Zahn gave me when not on duty is outside of Ben Long, there was a place called the Good Shepherd Convent. And this was run by a group of nuns. And it was great to go there when not on duty. We would paint a wall or repair a fence or do something to help these sisters out because they were not Vietnamese. You know, they were people. And that's the way we looked at it. The convent was also an orphanage. And Sergeant Zahn knew the name of every kid in that orphanage, and they all loved him. When we would go there to work, there was this one young man, 6 years old. His name was Win To. Win, I don't know why, when I would walk in the convent, he would run to me and grab me by the pants leg, and he would not let me go. So everywhere I went in the convent, Win went. If I sat down to eat dinner, and mostly seed rations. Our seed rations were packaged in 1954, but they were seed rations, so we ate them. And he would share my seed rations with me, mostly the cookies. And I'd always make sure that I took my seed rations, if someone else was there, and swap my cigarettes from the seed rations to them to get their cookies so he would have something to eat. And a lot of times, this young man would go to sleep in my lap. And he was my partner. I loved that little boy. So knowing this, I went to the sisters of the convent, and I said, what do I need to do to adopt this boy? I want to adopt him. I want to take this boy home with me. And so they gave me the information that I sent home to my parents and to the state of Alabama, which the adoption papers had to be processed through. This took a period of about 6 months. And so one night at the convent, we had some attacks the night before, so my job as being explosive ordnance was we were around the entire perimeter of the convent, and we cleaned up all the mines and all the explosives and everything else so it would be safe for the kids and everyone who came through the village. So the next morning, I was tired, I was wore out. I got the orders. I was going home in 3 weeks, but I had the adoption papers. So I took the adoption papers to the convent. I'm walking up the road to the convent, and I called him Winter. Win saw me, and he came running across the field and stepped on one of the landmines that I missed. He landed about 30 feet from me, and I grabbed him, and I walked. And I would not let him go. The sisters tried to take him away from me, but it didn't happen. 2 days later, we buried my little boy. I came home from Vietnam in uniform, processed out through Oakland to go home to my parents, walked out of the airplane and had people throwing rocks and bananas and eggs and everything else at me because I was in uniform and I was a soldier from Vietnam and a baby killer. I got home to my parents. I turned around and went back to Vietnam. I served 2 tours, wounded several times, spent some time as a POW. When I came home, that second time, I was a wild and crazy young man. And I was on a path of destruction. No one could get near me. And I met this young lady who was Jewish. And I started studying the Jewish faith. And the first time I went to temple with her, there was a bunch of kids. And they all seemed to like me. I have taught religious school now for over 40 years. Every time I walk in that door on Sunday morning, and one of those kids comes up and gives me a hug, I have my boy back. There is a reason for everything that we go through. We just need to find the reasons for that and live with them. Without my family, without my love for these kids, I wouldn't be here. And I thank you for remembering that all the people that spoke tonight, and all of us as veterans, we learned something. And we love you, and we love our country. Thank you.